On November 9th, 1961, somewhere over the endless blue of the Pacific Ocean, the United States quietly proved something the rest of the world was not ready to accept. While politicians argued, generals postured, and headlines focused on missiles and speeches, American engineers were rewriting the laws of flight itself. What happened that day never made the front page of a newspaper, but inside the Soviet Union, it sent shockwaves through intelligence headquarters and military command rooms. Because for the first time, Soviet radar operators saw something that forced them to confront a terrifying possibility that the United States had learned how to fly where airplanes were never meant to go. Several hundred miles off the coast of California, a rust-streaked Soviet fishing trawler named Viga drifted quietly through rolling seas. To the outside world, it was nothing more than another tired vessel dragging nets through the Pacific. But below deck, there were no fish, no ice, and no sailors gutting tuna. The Viga was an intelligence ship packed with radar consoles, signal intercept equipment, and technicians whose job was to listen to America's secrets. Its mission was simple: watch, record, and report. For weeks, its radar screens showed the same familiar patterns: U.S. Navy patrol aircraft, commercial airliners descending toward Los Angeles, the steady, predictable rhythm of Cold War skies. Then, just after 1,300 hours, that rhythm broke. A large radar return appeared at high altitude. Lieutenant Viktor Volkov barely glanced at it before identifying the signature: a B-52 Stratofortress. 45,000 feet. Subsonic. A known threat, yes, but a manageable one. The Soviets had studied the B-52 for years. Volkov reached for his logbook, ready to make another routine entry in an ocean of routine entries. But before his pen touched the paper, something impossible happened. From the belly of the bomber, a second radar contact appeared, smaller, sharper, separate. In the world of early 1960s aviation, this usually meant only one thing: a bomb falling toward Earth, or a missile accelerating along a predictable ballistic arc. This object did neither. Instead of dropping, it surged upward. On Volkov's radar screen, the new contact accelerated with a violence that defied calibration. It tore through more than Mach 3 climbing. The altitude indicator spun wildly past 60,000 feet, 70,000, 80,000. Volkov tapped the glass of the scope, convinced the vacuum tubes were malfunctioning or that salt air had corroded a connection. No aircraft could move like this. Soviet interceptors struggled to even reach 60,000 feet. This object blasted past 100,000 feet and continued accelerating. It wasn't falling. It wasn't tumbling. It was flying underground toward the space. Panic swept the radar room. The captain was summoned. He stared silently at the glowing trace as the contact reached altitudes reserved for satellites, not airplanes. For a brief, horrifying moment, the crew of the Viga believed they were witnessing the birth of a new weapon, an air-launched intercontinental ballistic missile. Capable of being deployed from anywhere on Earth, the Americans could launch nuclear weapons from the edge of space. The Soviet early warning system was instantly obsolete, but then the object did something even more unsettling. It leveled out. A ballistic missile cannot level out. A satellite cannot bank. Yet the radar trace showed controlled horizontal flight in the near vacuum of the upper atmosphere. And then, impossibly, it turned. Actually, that moment the fear inside the Viga crystallized into something far worse than panic. This machine was piloted. It descended just as violently as it climbed, decelerating through the lower atmosphere before vanishing from radar as it landed somewhere in the Mojave Desert. Within minutes, an encrypted report left the Viga under the highest priority code available, bypassing normal command channels and routing straight to Moscow. When Soviet intelligence analysts received the data, confusion replaced fear. Speed graphs showed Mach 6, more than 4,000 miles per hour. At those velocities, air friction turns into a blowtorch. Aluminum melts. Steel softens. Human bodies collapse under crushing G-forces. And yet, this machine flew repeatedly, deliberately, and survived. The Soviet Union had just sent Yuri Gagarin into orbit, capturing global headlines with the triumph of spaceflight. But Gagarin rode inside a capsule, a metal sphere thrown into space by brute force and brought down by parachute. What the Vega detected was different. It was active, controlled, reusable. It suggested something far more dangerous, that the United States was bypassing the capsule era entirely and learning how to fly back from space. Soviet engineers immediately focused on air defense. Their doctrine relied on surface-to-air missiles like the SA-2, designed to intercept high-flying spy planes. But those systems were optimized for targets at Mach 2 or Mach 3. Against something moving at Mach 6 near the edge of space, the guidance systems were blind. The missiles would run out of fuel before they could even calculate an intercept. A special committee was formed within Soviet air defense forces with one urgent mandate: determine what this machine was, how its pilot survived, and whether it could carry weapons. If it was a bomber, the Cold War was effectively over. Spies were activated across the United States. They monitored aviation journals, listened to conversations near Edwards Air Force Base, tracked shipments of exotic fuels and metals. Whispers surfaced, references to classified projects, strange rocket engines, pilots wearing precious suits that looked more like space gear than flight uniforms. Then came a photograph, grainy, black and white, taken from miles away. It showed a B-52 taxiing down a desert runway, and beneath its wing, a small, dagger-shaped aircraft painted jet black. That detail stunned Soviet analysts. Black paint wasn't camouflage. It was thermal management. At high altitudes where convection is useless, heat can only escape by radiation. The Americans hadn't painted the aircraft black to hide it. They painted it black to survive. Further investigation revealed exotic metals. Nickel-based superalloys like Inconel X materials so difficult to machine that they destroyed tools and resisted welding. The conclusion was unavoidable. The United States had solved problems Soviet industry could barely approach. As more flights were tracked, Soviet fear intensified. The aircraft used reaction control thrusters, small jets used to maneuver in a vacuum. That meant it wasn't just skimming the edge of space, it was operating in it. Intelligence analysts became convinced they were watching the prototype of a space bomber capable of skipping across the atmosphere, striking targets, and returning home before defenses could react. Entire Soviet programs were reoriented around countering this threat. Billions of rubles flowed into interceptor designs that would eventually become the MiG-25A. Steel brute built to catch a ghost. Then, in 1967, something changed. The black aircraft reappeared, painted white. Soviet analysts were baffled. White reflected heat. Black radiated it. Why abandon a proven thermal strategy? The answer, when it arrived, was chilling. The white coating wasn't paint. It was an ablative material designed to burn away. The Americans had pushed the aircraft beyond its limits. They were now flying a machine expected to partially destroy itself to gather data. On October 3, 1967, Soviet radar stations tracked the fastest flight in human history. Mach 67 there in front of the aircraft turned into plasma. Radio communication vanished. For minutes, the pilot flew blind at the edge of survivability. When the aircraft landed, it was charred and scarred, its skin peeling, parts of its structure nearly melted away. To Soviet generals, the revelation was shocking. This was not a weapon. It was a fragile scientific instrument. It couldn't carry bombs. It couldn't sustain combat operations. It required days of repair for minutes of flight. Relief spread through Moscow, but it was short-lived, because the implication was worse. The Americans weren't building a bomber. They were building knowledge. Every flight produced data that would shape aerospace engineering for decades. That realization became undeniable on November 15, 1967, when Soviet monitoring stations detected chaos in the telemetry stream. The aircraft had entered a hypersonic spin. Structural limits were exceeded. The machine shattered in midair. The pilot, Major Mike Adams, was killed. The program ended shortly afterward. To the outside world, it looked like failure. To Soviet intelligence, it looked like something far more dangerous: completion. The truth, finally revealed in classified assessments, was that the aircraft had never been a weapon at all. It was the North American X-15, a flying laboratory designed to answer one question: how do you bring a winged vehicle back from space alive? The reaction controls, the heat management, the dead stick landings, all of it fed directly into the future of spaceflight. Neil Armstrong himself flew the X-15 before walking on the moon, the skip-glide profiles that terrified. Soviet radar operators were not attack runs. They were survival techniques. The irony was profound. The Soviet Union, obsessed with firsts and spectacle, chased a phantom weapon that didn't exist. The United States quietly mastered the fundamentals. The data from the X-15 became the foundation of the space shuttle. Modern spacecraft re-entry and hypersonic flight research that still hasn't been surpassed. The speed record it set remains unbroken to this day. Hanging silently in the Smithsonian, the X-15 looks small, almost unremarkable. But decades ago, it forced a superpower to confront an uncomfortable truth. The Cold War wasn't always one with missiles or threats. Sometimes it was one with engineers, test pilots, and the courage to fly faster than anyone thought possible, not to destroy the world, but to understand it.